Hello there, my name is Teleola and this is Career Talks with me. So, the purpose of this is to showcase Nigerian trained lawyers who are now in the diaspora doing amazing things. So, they'll be sharing their personal experiences, and this would help those who are looking to tow a similar path as them. This promises to be value packed. Make sure you stay tuned. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. So today we have Kenny, and Kenny is another special guest on my channel. Of course, all my guests are special. I was introduced to him by Coyote, and this is because someone asked me to bring someone who has experience as an in-house counsel in Canada, and Coyote kindly referred me to Kenny. So he's the best person for the job because I went through his profile and he has like years and years of experience. He's a veteran in this game, and yeah, we look forward to hearing from him and just learning from him. So, Kenny, please introduce yourself briefly.
Thanks, Dele. And thanks for extending an invitation to have me here. I'm really excited to share my experiences with people. I'm always an advocate of, leaving the door open for the next generation or any other person that's going to come after you, because you don't want people to go through exactly the same thing you went through just because you feel like they needed to also find some way around the licensing process by themselves. So by way of introduction, my name is Kenny Okunola. I did my legal training in Nigeria, specifically Obafemi Awolowo University, the greatest institution in Africa, as we like to believe it is. I'm pretty sure that's probably not what obtains right now. So I started my career back in Nigeria. Initially, I was working with a small boutique firm. Things didn't work out for me. I didn't really like that kind of practice. After a while, I switched in-house in Nigeria, so it was a mix of corporate and compliance that I was doing. And by the time I moved to Canada, it sort of was a no-brainer for me to continue working as a corporate lawyer. Eventually, I find myself working in the field of securities law. I initially was a securities paralegal while I was writing my licensing exams, and eventually transitioned to become a corporate securities and M&A lawyer, which is what I practically, still do till today.
Hmm. Okay, thank you so much for that brief introduction. So let me just jump right into it. Why did you make the transition from law in Nigeria? Because you're practicing law in Nigeria. Okay, now you said you were practicing law in Nigeria first in a boutique law firm and then you went in house. So why did you make that switch from practicing in Nigeria to Canada?
So the switch was mainly because I knew I was going to leave the country anyways. It was something that I was supposed to have done like a couple of years ago. I think back in 2013, I got admission for my LLM in Canada, but for whatever reason, I decided not to go. At the point, it didn't feel like a great idea. I told myself, you know what, I'm going to become a student all over again. And then, I didn't feel like I'd saved up enough money to go be independent as a student. So, and I didn't want to be dependent on my parents or any other relative, for whatever I needed to survive in Canada. So for me, it felt like, as much as traveling abroad at the time, felt like a great idea, it didn't really feel like it was a good idea for me. So it was sort of already in the pipeline. So a few years down the line, I eventually started the process of making the switch as a permanent resident to Canada in 2017. So that was just about 5 years after I was initially supposed to travel. So I kind of realized that I was going to have to leave anyways. And eventually I knew that I had to get it right whenever I was going to make that switch. So making the switch was always in the pipeline. There was also that desire to sort of see what's out there. When you've been in a particular practice, especially lawyers in Nigeria, there is a tendency for you to feel like there's something else that's missing. that you haven't really been able to achieve, which you feel like you need to be in the international space, you need to be able to do more exciting work, work that will get your adrenaline, blood pumping. Because sometimes you go through the routine, you just wake up, you go to work and you work on a deal or you work on something, and suddenly you start feeling, unease. You start feeling like there's something else, that there's so much more out there. And of course, there's also the part of, people wanting to leave because they feel like they're, for career growth, the opportunities that that are bound here are so many, and most people, it doesn't mean you can't succeed in Nigeria. That's not what I mean to say. I have so many colleagues that are still back in Nigeria that are really doing great stuff. But it's a personal decision that I feel like everyone gets to make at some point in time, where they feel like they are either making progress in their career, or they are either learning new things, or they're just going through the motions and doing the same thing over and over and over again. So the switch was motivated by a couple of factors. That's coupled with also family, my career, and the fact that the switch was already always in the pipeline anyways.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, you wanted to leave in 2013, but I guess it's better late than never. Now you're here and you're doing well, and that's why you're here, to advise people who are also looking to tour a similar path as you. Okay, so my this takes me to my next question, which is that, is it possible for someone to do their articling in-house as opposed to doing it in a law firm in Canada?
So yes, I'll probably say yes and no. So I'll start with the yes. Yes, it's possible depending on, well, let me say as a general rule, you can article, especially I can use the Law Society of our brother as a case study. And I should probably give a little bit of a background as to how the law societies in Canada work, just in case anyone is watching and they sort of don't understand. Unlike in Nigeria, where we've got the Nigerian Bar Association, which is like the umbrella body for all legal practitioners in Nigeria, and then we've got the Lagos branch, or your branch, Akure branch, and those branches are really not specifically autonomous. They don't really, prescribe rules of professional, procedure or practice or whatever for any lawyers that are members. They're just more like community building groups as far as I'm concerned. But in Canada, yeah, we do have the Canadian Bar Association, but then the Canadian Bar Association doesn't really control a lot like the provincial bar associations. So for Alberta, I am a member of the Law Society of Alberta. We've got the Law Society of Ontario, used to be called the Law Society of Upper Canada. We've got the Law Society of BC. So these law societies of the respective provinces, they are the actual entities that are responsible for determining who becomes a lawyer in those provinces. So again, unlike in Nigeria, where you can be a lawyer and you can get a brief in Akure, but then you live in Lagos. In Alberta, yeah, if you're called in Alberta, you can practice in Alberta. You can go and practice in Ontario. Now, if you work with a national firm, there are times when you can walk, across the line, but you don't technically give legal advice or sign any documents that is going to be used in Ontario if you are not called to practice in Ontario. So now, the reason why I'm also saying, giving this background, is because these respective law societies, they also have different rules for how you can become an articling student. Now, for you to become an articling student, you need a principal. In Alberta, for example, your principal is someone that has been practicing for at least 5 years. And your principal then makes an application to be eligible. Now, there's a training now that they also have to undergo. But prior to now, there was no training, but they have to make an application to be eligible to take you on as a principal. Then you will also speak to them saying, would you like to be my principal? Now, this process can be very autonomous. It can run independent of just anyone trying to control it. If it's like with a big law firm where you interview, you become an articling student, or you get an articling offer, then they just talk to anyone within the firm who is interested in acting as a principal. So it's even possible you don't even know who your principal is. If it's, for example, when I was at Denton's, I didn't know who my principal was as at the time I got my offer letter. So because typically you get your offer letter and then you resume a year after. So I think it was about 6 months after I got introduced to one of the partners that, hey, Kenny, this person has agreed to act as your principal, and we thought it was a good idea for you guys to meet each other. But when it comes to the in-house side of things, because in-house operations are a bit lean compared to like a national law firm where you have like 300 lawyers in every offices across Canada. But in-house, you can probably just have, I think a very big in-house legal team would be like 15 to 20, maybe maximum 25. So now out of those 15 people, number one, the issue is most of them don't want to act as principals. Number two, they don't have that set process for determining how someone gets to select a principal or an articling student. So because of that, we don't have a lot of people going in-house. But once you can get someone that wants to act as your principal, and you interview with this in-house company or a company that's looking for a lawyer, an articling student in-house, it's actually very easy. I do have a colleague who, because my journey is a bit different, I wrote the bar exam, the NC exams, went through the bar admission process, articled at a national law firm, became an associate there before moving in-house. So it's more like I still went through the traditional route before switching back to in-house practice, which was the last thing I did before I leave Nigeria. But I do have a colleague who never went to a law firm. So she interviewed with a company. It's a very big company in Ontario, and then she got an offer from them to article with them. She's still working with them till today, and they decided to hire her because they sort of already have done it before. So they already know the process around that. But if you're going to be the first articling student at that company, you may need to tell them exactly how they need to get it done, because they may not know. That's another issue. So yes, that's the yes part. No would mean that if the in-house legal departments, if they don't have, number one, anyone that wants to act as your principal, or they don't have anyone that's 5 years and above, because it's possible that they've got a general counsel who is like 15 years at the bar, they've got like 2 senior counsels who are slammed and are not ready to mentor anybody, and then they've got junior counsels that are 3-4 years at the bar. Then yes, you can't get a job as an articling student in those kind of situations.
Thank you so much for that robust answer, because I'm sure some people might be wondering if it's possible to do your articling the articling role within a company that's as an in-house counsel as opposed to doing it within a law firm. Okay, so thank you so much for that. I was going to ask why you made that switch from being a law firm, sorry, being an associate in a law firm to moving in-house in Canada.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, for anyone that has worked in a, in private practice before, especially in Canada, you know how crazy the hours are. So typical private practice life, it's very, very nice life, I must admit. It's very exciting. It's exciting, and whenever I talk to people that are just starting their careers as lawyers in Canada, I'm like, yes, do it. Go to private practice, like get a decent law firm. I worked for arguably one of the biggest firms in Canada and actually the largest law firm in the world. So I know how exciting and intoxicating it can be to be in private practice. But it has its pros and cons. Pros, you are in the midst of, in the thick of things. You get to do exciting work. You're on a deal and they tell you, oh, this is a $1 billion deal, or this is a 450 million bond offering, dollars or bond offering, and you're like, oh wow, this is amazing. And then you finish the deal, you guys have closing drinks. Sometimes a client will present like a plaque to you, and then you have it as a keepsake on your shelves. Very exciting work. You work late, you don't have to worry about how you're gonna get home. There's a special cab waiting to take you home. They order dinner for you. You get to maybe go on like business development outings with clients. They're very exciting. But then there are some drawbacks of also working in private practice. One of them is that you have to be willing not to have a life. It's the interesting thing is when I was articling, all my colleagues, every one of them were single people living downtown, just a few minutes away from the office. And then I was living like 30 minutes away from the office. So whenever they say, so they like, they go to work on Sundays. It was a normal thing. They're like, oh, I'm not doing anything with my life on a Sunday. Why wouldn't I want to go to work? So they get up on like, 7 a.m. on a Sunday, and they're like, oh yeah, it's a free day to them. Given my own background, Sunday is not a free day. Sunday is a day that you are slammed without doing any other thing outside of the workspace. So that number one. Number two is also that because when you're in private practice, there's a whole lot of interactions that you need to worry about that you don't worry about in-house. So for example, you bill hours. You bill hours in private practice. You don't bill hours in-house. You're not judged by your hours. In private practice, nobody cares whether you really know what you're doing. Nobody really cares. Of course, you don't want to drop the ball too often. You don't want people to say you are the reason why a client lost millions of dollars or whatever. No, not that kind of errors. But in terms of really being ingenious, really being a business person, really being being focused on exactly on the question why. Because in private practice, you're usually focused on doing it and getting the job done. But when you switch in-house, you always have to be able to ask why, because you're going to be dealing with business people. I remember when I first switched in-house and I was talking to my GC in-house in Canada. And by the way, I was in-house at some point in Canada before I became a lawyer. Then I was a paralegal. So I sort of already, and I was working at one of the biggest accounting firm as part of their legal team. So I sort of already got a vibe of what in-house life was going to be prior to my starting my articling role. So it was sort of something again that was already in the pipeline from my own perspective, that if this is getting on my nerves too much, I already know what I'm gonna do, eventually. So I remember when I first switched in, I was talking to my GC, and the issue was a contractual issue with one of our business people. They sort of wanted to get something done without diverging too much. They wanted to get something done. It was going to cost them money if they don't get it done in 7 days. They had a contract that they needed to look at. So I looked at the contract and I started, churning out my own opinion about what should be done, what should not be done. It was almost like 5 pages. And that was a very conservative response, right? Because in private practice, you want to draft up a serious memo so the clients see values for their work. And then my GC came to me, like, Kenny, we don't need this. I just need you to tell me what we should do in one line. Like, I don't want this. Just tell me what we should do in just a sentence. And we're going to take you up on it. We believe you know what you're doing. Like, nobody's going to question you or try to micromanage you. That's another thing. In private practice, there's a lot of micromanagement. Everything goes up the chain. On every deal, I am a corporate securities lawyer, so what I'm saying may not necessarily apply in litigation. But on every deal you are on, there's an articling student, there's an associate, there's a mid-level associate, there's a senior associate, there's a junior partner, there's a senior partner, and then everything trickles down. There's a lot of micromanagement in terms of, and not like they're going to stand by your shoulder saying, are you doing it right? But there are things that doesn't go to the partner directly. That has to go to the senior associate, and then the senior associate takes it to the partner. But then the dynamic is really different in now. So I remember I had to review the contract again. I stayed up for a few hours, in the evening, at night, and decided to take a look at it. The next day, I had like a quick drop into the office of those people, and I was like, oh, this is what I think we should do. And of course, I gave them the right opinion, of course. But that sort of opened up my eyes to realize that these guys don't care about the memo. Do you know I have gotten feedback from some partners? Because again, that's another thing about private practice. There are so many partners with so many preferences. It doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong, but they've developed a way of wanting to do things. So even if the legal opinion is right, but the form in which it was presented is not what they've been used to. They're like, can you use this template instead? So I didn't realize that, you mean I could have stayed up all night drafting this 10-page memo, but then I would have prepared a great memo, but guess what? I probably won't be able to tell you what's inside that memo because I researched it. Look at case law, Westlaw, LexisNexis, brought out something really solid. But if you ask me, can you tell me what is in this memo? I probably wouldn't know it, because it's a product of research, not something I had internalized, that I've come to understand the why. Because those guys told me, if we don't do this, you're gonna lose this. We're gonna lose this money. If we lose this money, it's gonna affect, our bottom line at the end of the year. And I was able to internalize that to the extent that when we're chatting, it was just more like friends chatting about, oh, should we do this? No, I don't think you should do it because of this. Very different. Then finally, one advantage of being an internationally trained lawyer, which is arguably the most important reason why I made that switch, is also that being an internationally trained lawyer, and by internationally trained lawyer, in case anyone is hearing that for the first time, what I mean is that you studied outside of Canada or wherever it is you are, you studied outside of that country. That's where you got your law degree outside of the country. Especially if you've practiced for quite some time. I'm more than a decade at the bar in Nigeria already, and the advantage to that is that you get more negotiation power with in-house employers than law firms. So law firms are sort of set in their ways, except you are bringing a book of accounts. I know of people that came from the UK with books of accounts, and within 2 years of being called to the bar, they made them partners at very large firms. So except you're coming with a big book of accounts, forget about it. You're starting from the bottom as an articling student, become a first year, second year, third year, fourth, fifth, sixth. If you're lucky, you become a partner, before your 8th year. But the difference with, going in-house is you can actually negotiate. They actually do recognize your experience prior to coming to Canada, which is one of the things that really worked for me. When I was negotiating my move, it wasn't the case of, oh, but you became a lawyer at this year in Canada. No, it was like, oh, I have this experience with commercial law. I have this experience with corporate law. I was a securities paralegal for 4 years before I became a lawyer. So it was more like a holistic, fulsome approach as against what year were you called in Canada. So that can really make a lot of difference in your compensation package. I tell people, as much as, the firm I was working at was probably very competitive in their pay, I am earning much more in-house, because the myth is you're supposed to take a pay cut when you're going in-house. That's a myth. Well, it is a fact, but it can be a myth sometimes. So the myth is, you're supposed to take a pay cut, but then it doesn't really apply in our own situation, because we do have some experience that has been relegated because they wanted us to start from scratch. But that experience isn't wasted when you want to go in-house. But then that would probably only come in handy if your path is similar to mine. You've gone to private practice for a while, you have a bit of a bragging right that, oh, I do know what I'm doing. If you're going in directly, finish your exams and you're going in-house, it may be a bit of a tough sell, but never say never.
Mm. Wow. Thank you so much for that. You have answered my questions, because I was going to ask about the work-life balance. Like, obviously in private practice, you don't really have a life, as opposed to working in-house. And then I was going to ask about the compensation as well. Like, which one pays more or pays better? But as you've said, if you come in with your years of experience, they will compensate you appropriately in-house, as opposed to being in private practice where you have to start from the bottom. Because that's a reason why some people, well, I've had some conversations with people, and then as trained lawyers, maybe internationally trained lawyers, they just decide to switch to another career path because they don't want to start from the bottom again. As articling students, then they become like year one associates and climb the ladder again. Okay, thank you so much for that. So I was going to ask if you have any advice for someone who might want to tow a similar path as you, which is becoming an in-house counsel in Canada after having qualified in Nigeria and maybe worked for a few years in Nigeria, either in private practice or as an in-house counsel.
Yeah, thanks for that. If anyone is watching this and you're thinking of switching in-house or going in-house directly after writing your exams, I would probably say I still have a bit of I'm still gonna have a bit of bias towards private practice in the sense that I still feel like it's valuable experience. I don't think it's still something you should do away with totally, especially if you're new to Canada. And the reason is that you get to, apart from the bragging rights, every time, every room I entered now, any meeting room I get into, they're like, "Oh, Kenny joined us from this firm." That's what they say. They don't say, "Oh, Kenny was an NCA candidate that moved from Nigeria." They're like, "Oh, Kenny joined us from this firm," because the firm is a respected firm. So they just mention the name of the firm every time I'm introduced. So apart from that, you actually get exposed to invaluable experiences in the sense that, so for example, when I was articling, I had to do rotations. So that's part of the articling process or program in Canada at a decent firm, because sometimes if you go to like a boutique firm or maybe like a one-man firm, you may not have the opportunity to rotate through different business groups or whatever. So I had to do like rotations across corporate group, or the corporate group, corporate and securities group, litigation, banking, real estate, insolvency, and most of these are areas that I've not even touched ever again since my articling program. But guess what? When you go in house, as much as I was even hired to be, because I work for an investment trust right now, and I'm still working as a corporate and securities legal counsel. But as much as that is like the main job description that I was hired to do, I still get asked some questions sometimes. For example, I still get asked questions on intellectual property. I get asked questions on commercial contract terms. I do some fund work with some of our trusts and our funds that we use to raise money here and there. So the truth is, you still want to be that lawyer that has that all-round knowledge. So if you have the opportunity, what I'm gonna advise is, if you have the opportunity, I'll say start from private practice, even if it's just for a year. Do your articling, do your first year, get out in your second year if it's not for you. I'm not saying stay on it forever, but if you feel like you still don't want to go in, and besides, in addition to that, before I go on, sometimes I believe in the process of elimination, because you know what you don't want once you've tried it. But if you never try it, you will forever be thinking, would I have liked it? So you don't want to ever go in house thinking, would I have liked it in private practice? Now, there's nothing anyone can tell me that will make me feel like I'm missing anything. I may end up going back to private practice, don't get me wrong. That's not the point. But the point is, someone is telling me right now, "Oh, Kenny, why are you in house? You're missing." I'm like, no, I'm not. Because whatever it is you're going through, I have been through it, and I don't think that's what I want for this stage of my life or my career. So I think everyone should be able to say that, by process of elimination, try a private practice. But if you must proceed without going into private practice at all and go in-house directly, then you want to start making the connections right away when you move to Canada. When you move to Canada, the thing about in-house roles, especially for articling students, is that they are very scarce. And that is where the real networking is going to come into play. People say networking and throw networking around a lot. Oh, you have to network. What does that exactly, what does it exactly mean? So networking is not necessarily asking for a job. It's essentially attending events, join interest groups. I and a couple of people co-founded an organization for internationally trained lawyers called the ITL Network. I think every ITL should be a part of that group. There's a membership that is free for NCA students. There are resources, there are programs and events that you can attend, network with people. People like myself are always there. People that have even gone ahead of me are always there. So when you network with people, you'll be surprised that in-house positions, especially for articling positions, they are not usually advertised. It's not like the law firms that will say, "Oh, we are recruiting for articling students every June." It's more of word of mouth. "Oh, why? This is what I used to do. I'm actually very interested in what you guys do in this organization. Please remember me if you are ever hiring." And you may even decide not to even lead with that, because sometimes when you ask people for a job, they put up a wall, because they're like, "Oh, you need a favor from me." So maybe just ask for their number, go for coffee when you have time, whatever it is you understand networking to be, do it and see what happens. Now, notwithstanding everything I've said, there are some articling positions that are in-house that are advertised. So when you see that, apply. When you're about to interview, make sure you reach out to people in that organization because they are usually very small and closely knit. Unlike in a firm of 300 lawyers where you can talk to an associate who won't really know anyone on the student recruitment committee, in-house, they're going to ask everybody. So if, for example, you are interviewing at my company and you sort of name drop and you say, oh, I was chatting with Kenny and Kenny had great stuff to say about this company and I'm just excited. I can't wait to join you. I can assure you my colleague that you're speaking with is going to come ask me that, Kenny, someone mentioned your name. What do you think about that guy? Or what do you think about that lady? And I'm going to be like, oh, wow, yeah, I spoke with them. They're so amazing. I think they will be a great addition to the team. And guess what? That person is getting hired because it's always such a small team of people and the interests and politics is not as serious as in law firms where even if somebody thinks you're good, the other person may think you're not necessarily good for business.
That's true. Like you've dropped a lot of gems. Firstly, you said one needs to just have that exposure to different areas of the law by working in private practice, which is very important, by the way. And then the ITL network, I'll just link it below, so it will be in the description box. And if you're interested, please join. As you said, it's free for for NCA students, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay. So, are there any things that you would have done differently in your career transition journey?
I probably would have left earlier than I did. Because one thing I've realized about relocating to a different country is it doesn't matter what level you were. Again, there are some exceptions. If you're a lawyer, big time lawyer, and you can bring like serious books of accounts, you'll probably move faster. But if you are open to rely on your skills and your knowledge and your wit and your charm, yes, you're going to start from the beginning like every one of us. So the earlier the better because I have colleagues that are partners right now. In fact, I do have one colleague that we were in law school together in Nigeria, and this person is a partner at the national law firm in Canada. Yeah, we were in law school together. See, this person is a partner now. But why? They left 1 year. They left after NYSC. The person left after the NYSC. And it's just to let you know that it has nothing to do with whether you're smart or whatever. Well, yeah, that's important, but it's not just about that. There is just the timing part, which sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to wait your turn. If I have a colleague right now that we went to school together that is planning to make the switch this year, the person can come to Canada and then automatically come to be on the same level of sports that I am right now. They will have to sort of you know you know climb through the process again, start the process all over. They won't just say, oh, you were a 10th year in Nigeria, okay, yeah, you go, this is your office, you're not a partner. No. So I think that's probably one thing I would have changed. I'll probably have made the switch early because as much as some of the experiences I got in Nigeria, they're not entirely a waste. Some of them are still very useful now, but the transferability is not at 100%. Let me put it that way. So it's not at 100%. I can't exactly say every single thing I learned in Nigeria I am applying every single one of them right now. There are some things I remember and I'm like, oh yeah, I've done this before. This sounds familiar. But it's not exactly like moving from a law firm here to another law firm where I can say, oh yeah, I've worked on this kind of deal. Exactly the same deal. I can use the closing agenda. I can use the templates for the documents that we drafted. No. So if you are watching this and you're thinking of switching and you're like, oh, let me make some more money, get some more experience. As long as you think you're going to switch now.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Switch now. So that you don't regret it. So you don't look at your mates and say, if I had known, I would have done that 10 years ago. Okay, so now to the exciting bit. So, are there any culture shocks that you encountered so far, or that you've encountered so far?
Well, yeah, so many of them. I'll try and see if I can remember some. I guess maybe the very first one was what corporate Canada looks like. Because when I moved, I got a job here within 6 weeks. It was exactly 6 weeks when I got my first job at the law firm. Then I was yet to um, I was yet to even start my NCA exams. That's the funny thing. So I was working as a initially I was an assistant, then I switched to a paralegal role. And I guess one thing that was really different was realizing that even these paralegals have specializations. You know, in Nigeria, number one, we don't usually have, not all law firms have assistants. Now, the ones that do, you'll probably be doing so many things, you know, because the firm is trying to minimize cost. But then I realized that these paralegals and assistants here, they do have specializations and they're actually respected. In fact, in some provinces like Ontario, paralegals can go to court. They do get a license. They are regulated by the Law Society in Ontario. Like they are so respected. Some of them even have offices. Some paralegals have assistants. That's how interesting it is. So when I joined, I was like, it was so weird. And I remember when I was applying for that role, I was chatting with the interviewer. She was like, Kenny, we need a securities paralegal. We see that you have a law degree. We see that you've also taken the Canadian securities course exam, that we think you will probably be able to do this role with a bit of of training. I was like, oh yeah, I can do anything. I mean, it's an assistant role. What do you think? I am a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for several years. How tough can the job of a paralegal be? It was tough, probably tougher than being a lawyer. And it was a shock to me because I was like, okay, this is different. You know, it's not like, oh, it's not just an admin task. Then, you know, it's just to move away from work related shock. You know, one thing I also came to discover in Canada is that Canadians are very friendly. They're very friendly. You know, you are you're driving, people don't expect you to honk. Like you honk for like the extreme of the extremest situations, if I can say that. Like when you honk, people find it offensive. Like, what did I do? Was it that bad? So people don't honk. You see Canadians, somebody is slowly moving, they'll just stay behind you, you know, and they are so like they follow a particular pattern. So if you're on like on a road, on the highway, and then there's like a on a different lane that no car is passing through that lane, and everyone is on one side of the lane because they need to turn right, and they all maintain it, and there will be a serious traffic on that right lane, and I'm like, why can't you guys take this left lane? Like, are you guys dumb? Because I remember in Nigeria now, people will take it and then corner at the end of the, but of course eventually I got used to it too. But one thing I've also now, I mean, also to talk about how friendly they are, you are trying to get out of a building, they're going to hold the door for you, and they expect you to also hold the door. You know, before I would just open the door and be like, I mean, I don't know you, you don't know me from anywhere. Why should I be holding the door for you? We're not going on a date. Who are you? You know? So why should I be holding the door for you? But apparently it's just like an unwritten rule. But the biggest of the shocks for me was that, I mean, apart from the code, because the code was a big shock. But apart from the code, I think the biggest shock for me was to realize that despite the fact that Canadians are very friendly, they are being friendly is actually also dangerous. Especially in the workplace, because you wouldn't really know who is for you and who is not for you. You know, so you really have to be careful, because somebody could be friendly and be smiling to you and they are reporting you to HR. You know, I used to, I probably shouldn't share that story on YouTube. Maybe in some close circle one day I'll share it. I'll share a story. But the truth is, you need to you need to also know that their friendliness is just a way of life. It has nothing to do it has nothing to do with how they feel about you. You know, like in Nigeria, for example, or most African countries, when a black person is friendly with you, they really feel your vibe, like they like you. When somebody doesn't like you, you know, but for them, it's a way of life. It's just something that is expected, you know, of a cultured person, as a regular, reasonable person. It has nothing to do with the emotional connection they have with you as to, you're a good person, I like you. So the fact that they're smiling and greeting you and they're asking about your weekend does not mean they're not going to report you to HR if they see you doing something that you're not supposed to do. You know, so that's one big shock.
Yeah, that's quite similar to the UK as well. They're smiling with you. Oh, they're so nice, but like you said, they will report you to HR and like, I thought we're friends. We actually go out for lunch together. We're not friends. I'm just polite. Oh, they're just polite. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Kenny. This has been extremely insightful, especially for those of you who might be watching and you might be thinking of making that switch to becoming an in-house counsel in Canada, and maybe you're not quite sure, you don't know if you'd have one, a work-life balance, two, you don't even know if it would be worth it, or three, you might not know if you'd be adequately compensated in terms of the cash. But now you've heard it from the horse's mouth. Someone who he has over 10 years of experience working as a lawyer, and he's been able to give us so much insight into how the entire process works. Thank you so much, Kenny. So, if you have any closing remarks, maybe in like a minute or two.
Well, I don't really have much to say. I'll just say thanks for having me on the show. I'm always excited to again share my experience with people. And if you're already in Canada and you want to connect, feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with internationally trained lawyers. If you're moving to Canada, whenever you're in the city of Calgary, shoot me a message. Be happy to grab a cup of coffee. And thanks for watching.
So, thank you all for watching. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.